There comes a moment in every life when the mask you've worn so carefully begins to crack. Tonight, as you settle into the quiet darkness, that moment has arrived. The world has grown still around you, and for the first time in longer than you can. Remember, there is nowhere left to run. You've spent years perfecting the art of being who others needed you to be. The reliable one, the strong one, the one who never breaks down, never asks for help, never admits that behind your composed exterior lives a heart that has been quietly breaking for longer than you care to admit. But tonight is different. Tonight, something inside you has shifted. Perhaps it was the way the evening light fell across your face as you caught your reflection in a darkened window. Perhaps it was the silence that followed, another day of pretending everything was fine. Whatever it was, you felt it. That small, persistent voice that has been trying to reach you through years of noise and distraction. You are tired. Not just physically tired, though your body carries the weight of countless sleepless nights. You are tired in your soul, tired of carrying secrets that feel too heavy for one person to bear, tired of smiling when your heart wants to weep, tired of being strong when what you really need is to collapse into someone's arms and admit that you don't have all the answers. The room around you holds the familiar shadows of your daily life, the same walls that have witnessed your private struggles, the same ceiling you've stared at during those long, restless hours when sleep refuses to come. But tonight, these shadows seem different. They feel less like barriers and more like old friends, inviting you to finally stop running from the parts of yourself you've kept hidden. There's a story that lives in your bones, one you've never told anyone. It's the story of the child you once were, before the world taught you that your feelings were too much, your needs too demanding, your very essence somehow wrong. That child still lives within you, waiting in the quiet corners of your heart, holding on to dreams and hopes that you buried long ago under the weight of expectation and disappointment. You remember her, don't you? The one who believed in magic, who saw wonder in ordinary moments, who felt everything so deeply that it scared the adults around her. They told her to be practical, to grow up, to stop being so sensitive. And so she learned to hide. She learned to make herself smaller, quieter, more acceptable to a world that seemed to have no room for the fullness of who she was. But here's what they never told you. That sensitive child was not your weakness. She was your gift. Every tear she cried, every dream she dared to dream, every moment she felt the world too intensely. These were not flaws to be corrected. They were the seeds of your deepest wisdom, your most profound capacity for love, your truest connection to the mystery of being alive. The pain you carry is not punishment for being wrong. It is the accumulated weight of years spent believing you had to be someone else to be worthy of love. Every time you silenced your truth to keep others comfortable, every time you swallowed your needs to avoid being called selfish, every time you turned your back on your own heart to fit into spaces that were too small for your spirit. And now, in this moment of quiet honesty, you begin to see the path forward. It doesn't require you to become someone new. It asks you to remember who you've always been, beneath all the layers of protection and performance. It invites you to extend the same compassion to yourself that you so freely give to others. The journey back to yourself begins with a simple recognition. You are not broken. You never were. You are a human being who has carried more than your share of sorrow, who has tried to find love in places where it was not available, who has given pieces of your soul to people who could not see their value. This does not make you damaged. It makes you human. The house settles around you with the soft creaks and sighs of a living thing finding its rest. Outside, the world continues its restless motion. But here, in this sanctuary of solitude, time moves differently. Here, you can finally allow yourself to feel the weight of everything you've been carrying alone. There was a time when you believed that being strong meant never showing vulnerability. You learned to wear your independence like armor, convincing yourself and others that you needed nothing from anyone. But tonight, as you sit with the honest ache in your chest, you begin to understand that true strength has nothing to do with invulnerability. True strength lies in the courage to feel deeply, to love fully, even when that love has been met with betrayal or indifference. You think of all the times you've apologized for taking up space, for having opinions, for feeling things others dismissed as overreaction. How many times did you shrink yourself to make others comfortable? How many times did you bite back words that needed to be spoken, swallow anger that deserved to be heard, hide tears that needed to be witnessed? The mirror on your dresser catches fragments of light from the street outside, creating patterns that dance and shift like memories. In those flickering reflections, you catch glimpses of all the versions of yourself you've been. The eager child, desperate for approval. The teenager who learned that love came with conditions. The young adult who threw herself into relationships and careers, trying to prove her worth through achievement and sacrifice. Each version of you was doing the best she could with what she understood about love and belonging. She couldn't have known then what you're beginning to understand now, that the love you spent your life seeking was always available within you, not as consolation prize for being unlovable to others, but as the fundamental truth of your existence. The pain you feel when relationships end, when dreams dissolve, when hopes are disappointed, this pain is not evidence of your inadequacy. It is proof of your capacity to love. It is your heart's way of honoring what mattered to you, even when others could not see its value. Every tear you've cried has been a prayer. Every sleepless night, a vigil held for dreams that deserved better than they received. You've been taught to see your sensitivity as a liability, your emotional depth as something to be managed and controlled. But what if your capacity to feel deeply is actually your greatest strength? What if your ability to love, even in the face of rejection, is not naivety, but wisdom? What if your refusal to become cynical, despite repeated disappointment, is not foolishness, but courage? The world needs people who feel deeply. It needs hearts that remain open even after being wounded. It needs souls brave enough to keep believing in beauty, in connection, in the possibility of authentic love, even when experience suggests such things are rare. You are one of these rare beings, and your tenderness is not a weakness to overcome, but a gift to treasure. As you breathe in the quiet of this moment, allow yourself to feel proud of the woman you've become. Not perfect, but real. Not invulnerable, but brave. Not without scars, but still willing to love. You have survived losses that could have broken you. You have found ways to hope again after hope seemed impossible. You have continued to show up for life, even when life has been unkind to you. This is not small accomplishment. This is heroic. This is sacred. This is the quiet revolution of a soul that refuses to be diminished by disappointment, that continues to bloom even in difficult soil. Tonight, as you prepare to rest, consider the possibility that everything you've been through has been preparing you for something beautiful. Not because suffering is good, but because you have alchemized your pain into wisdom, your loneliness into compassion, your fear into courage. You have become a person capable of loving with extraordinary depth, of seeing beauty where others see only ordinary moments, of offering comfort to wounded hearts because you know intimately what it means to hurt. The child within you stirs, sensing that it might finally be safe to emerge. She has been waiting so patiently for you to remember her worth, to see her dreams as worthy of pursuit, to honor her feelings as valid and important. She has secrets to tell you, songs to sing, stories to share about the magic she still believes in despite everything. The shadows in your room shift and soften as your eyes adjust to the gentle darkness. There's a quality tonight that daylight cannot match, a permission to be more honest, to feel more deeply, to acknowledge truths that seem too vulnerable for the harsh light of ordinary days. In this tender darkness, you can finally admit what you've known but couldn't quite say. You've been grieving. Not just for the relationships that ended or the dreams that didn't unfold as you hoped, but for the parts of yourself you sacrificed along the way. You've been mourning the girl who trusted too easily, who loved without calculating cost, who believed that if she just tried hard enough, she could earn the love she craved. You've been saying goodbye to the version of yourself who thought she could control outcomes through perfection, who believed her worth was determined by how useful she could be to others. This grief is holy work. It's not indulgence or self-pity. It's the necessary process of honoring what was lost so that what remains can finally be seen clearly. You cannot build an authentic life on a foundation of unacknowledged sorrow. You cannot love yourself fully while still carrying shame for the parts of your story that didn't unfold as planned. The tears that come in these quiet moments are not weakness. They are baptism. They are the soul's way of washing clean the accumulated residue of years spent trying to be someone you were never meant to be. Each tear carries away a lie you believed about your worth, a story you told yourself about why you weren't enough, piece of armor that protected you but also kept you isolated from your own heart. You remember the moment when you first learned that love was conditional. Perhaps it was a parent who withdrew affection when you disappointed them, a teacher who made you feel stupid for asking questions, a friend who abandoned you when you needed them most, a partner who loved the idea of you but not the reality of your complexities and contradictions. That moment marked the beginning of your long exile from yourself. You began to edit your personality, to present only the parts that seemed acceptable, to bury the aspects of your nature that had been met with rejection or criticism. You became skilled at reading rooms, at shape-shifting to meet expectations, at making yourself indispensable so that people would have reasons to keep you around. But every time you betrayed your authentic self to maintain a relationship, you betrayed the child within you who just wanted to be loved for who truly was. Every time you silenced your needs to avoid conflict, you taught that little girl that her desires didn't matter. Every time you accepted less than you deserved because you feared being alone, you confirmed her deepest suspicion that she was too much and not enough all at once. The pattern became so familiar, you didn't even recognize it as a pattern. You thought it was just how love worked. You thought everyone else had received some handbook about relationships that had been withheld from you. You blamed your loneliness on bad luck, poor timing, wrong choices, anything except the possibility that you had been looking for love in places where it simply wasn't available to someone as deep and complex as you. Here's what no one tells you about people like you, the ones who feel everything intensely and love with their whole hearts. You intimidate people who live on the surface of their emotions. Your capacity for depth makes them uncomfortable with their own shallowness. Your willingness to be vulnerable highlights their armor. Your authentic expression of feeling exposes their performed emotions. This is not your fault. This is not something you need to fix about yourself. This is simply the reality of moving through a world that has forgotten how to honor the full spectrum of human emotion. A world that has traded authentic connection for comfortable distance, genuine intimacy for performed relationships, real love for convenient arrangements. You have spent years trying to dim your light to make others comfortable, trying to love less, intensely so as not to overwhelm, trying to need less so as not to burden. But what if the solution isn't to make yourself smaller? What if the solution is to stop trying to find your home in hearts that don't have room for your vastness? The love you seek exists, but it cannot be earned through self-betrayal. It cannot be achieved by becoming someone you're not. It can only be received by someone brave enough to show up as they truly are, willing to be rejected by those who cannot appreciate their depth, rather than accepted by those who love only their mask. This requires a different kind of courage than you've been practicing. Not the courage to endure rejection, but the courage to risk being truly seen. Not the courage to keep giving when you receive nothing in return, but the courage to recognize when someone is incapable of receiving what you have to offer. Not the courage to love people who cannot love you back, but the courage to save your deepest love for those rare souls who can match your capacity for genuine connection. The night air carries whispers of seasons changing, of time moving in its eternal rhythm, regardless of human sorrow or joy. There's comfort in this continuity, in knowing that your personal struggles are held within something larger, more enduring. The moon has witnessed countless broken hearts finding their way back to wholeness. The stars have shone their light on infinite souls learning to love themselves back to life. You are not the first person to feel this particular loneliness, this specific ache of being misunderstood. Throughout history, sensitive souls have walked this path of learning to honor their depth in a world that often rewards superficiality. Artists and poets, mystics and dreamers, healers and teachers. They have all faced the choice you face now, to dim their light or to find the courage to shine more brightly, even if it means standing alone for a while. There's a story that lives in your cellular memory, passed down through generations of women who loved too much and felt too deeply. Your grandmother, perhaps, who stayed in a marriage that slowly eroded her spirit because she believed that's what good women did. Your mother, who sacrificed her dreams to raise children and support a man who never quite learned to see her worth. And now you, carrying their unexpressed longings, their unspoken truths, their unlived lives in your very bones. But you also carry their strength, their resilience, their capacity to endure heartbreak and still wake up the next morning willing to hope, their ability to find beauty in small moments, to create something from nothing, to love despite every reason not to. This is your inheritance, not just their pain, but their power. The patterns that have repeated through your lineage don't have to continue with you. You have the opportunity to be the one who breaks the cycle, who chooses differently, who says no to love that diminishes and yes to love that elevates. You can be the ancestor your descendants thank for having the courage to heal what seemed unhealable. This healing doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen through positive thinking or willpower alone. It happens through the slow, patient work of returning to yourself, of remembering who you were before the world taught you to be ashamed of your intensity, of reconnecting with the dreams you buried, the desires you denied, the aspects of your nature you learned to hide. In the therapy of your own solitude, you begin to have conversations with the different parts of yourself. The critic who learned to judge before others could. The protector who built walls to keep you safe. The achiever who thought love could be earned through performance. The people pleaser who believed harmony was worth any price. These parts developed to help you survive, but they may no longer serve the life you want to create. You can thank them for their service, while gently showing them new ways to support you. The critic can become discerning wisdom. The protector can learn to safeguard your energy without isolating you completely. The achiever can channel their drive toward goals that truly matter to you. The people pleaser can learn to please the most important person first, yourself. This is not selfish. This is essential. You cannot give from an empty well. You cannot love others authentically while betraying yourself. You cannot create healthy relationships from an unhealthy relationship with your own heart. The love you've been seeking outside yourself becomes possible only when you first offer it to the parts of you that have been waiting so long to be seen and accepted. As you practice this radical self-acceptance, something miraculous begins to happen. The desperate need for others' approval starts to fade. The anxiety about being liked transforms into curiosity about whether you actually like them. The fear of being alone dissolves as you discover that you're actually pretty good company. The urgency to find someone, anyone, to love you is replaced by the contentment of being truly known by the person whose opinion matters most, yourself. This shift changes everything. When you're no longer seeking love from a place of desperation, you become magnetic to healthier forms of connection. When you're no longer willing to accept crumbs, you make space for the feast. When you stop trying to convince people of your worth, you attract those who recognize it naturally. The child within you begins to trust. Again, she sees that you're finally listening to her needs, honoring her feelings, protecting her dreams. She starts to come out of hiding, bringing with her all the wonder and creativity and joy that you thought were lost forever. She reminds you how to play, how to laugh from your belly, how to find magic in ordinary moments. There's an ancient understanding that depression is not just personal pathology, but often a spiritual crisis, the soul's way of demanding that we stop living a life that doesn't fit us. What you've been calling your weakness, your oversensitivity, your inability to just get over things. This may actually be your psyche's refusal to accept a reality too small for your spirit. The sadness you carry is not just about what has happened to you. It's about what hasn't happened. It's about the life you haven't lived because you were too busy trying to live up to others' expectations. It's about the dreams you deferred, the chances you didn't take, the words you didn't speak, the love you didn't risk, because the possibility of rejection felt unbearable. But here, in the darkness of this night, something different becomes possible. Here, you can admit to dreams so tender, you've never spoken them aloud. Here you can acknowledge desires so deep, you've barely admitted them to yourself. Here you can feel the full weight of everything you've been carrying and finally understand that it's too much for one person to bear alone. Not because you're weak, but because some burdens are meant to be shared. The loneliness you feel is not about being single or misunderstood. It's the loneliness of living disconnected from your own truth. It's the isolation that comes from presenting a false self to the world, while your real self withers in hiding. It's the exhaustion of constantly translating your authentic experiences into language others can accept. You've become fluent in the art of making others comfortable with your complexity. You've learned to laugh off hurt instead of acknowledging its impact. You've mastered the skill of minimizing your needs so others don't feel burdened by them. You've perfected the performance of being fine when everything inside you is falling apart. But performance, no matter how skillful, cannot sustain you indefinitely. Eventually, the gap between who you are and who you pretend to be becomes too wide to bridge. Eventually, the cost of keeping others comfortable becomes higher than your capacity to pay. Eventually, your soul demands that you stop betraying yourself for the sake of relationships that require your self-betrayal to survive. This is that moment. This is when you finally say enough. Enough performing. Enough pretending. Enough accepting love that asks you to be less than who you are. Enough giving your precious life energy to people who cannot appreciate its value. Enough believing that your worth is determined by how much others need you, rather than by the simple fact of your existence. The path forward requires you to disappoint people. It requires you to say no to requests that drain you. It requires you to stop making yourself available to those who treat your availability as an entitlement rather than a gift. It requires you to risk being called difficult demanding, selfish, all the words used to shame people, especially women, for having boundaries. You may lose some relationships in the process of finding yourself. This is the tax you pay for authenticity. Some people in your life love who you've been pretending to be, not who you actually are. When you stop pretending, they may feel betrayed, confused, angry. They may try to guilt you back into the box you've outgrown. They may tell you that you've changed, and they won't mean it as a compliment. Let them go. Release them with compassion, but release them nonetheless. Your growth is not a betrayal of who you used to be. It's a commitment to who you're becoming. Your healing is not an abandonment of others. It's a gift to everyone brave enough to love the real you. In the space left behind by relationships that couldn't survive your authenticity, something beautiful begins to grow. Peace, self-respect, the kind of confidence that doesn't need external validation because it's rooted in self-knowledge, the ability to enjoy your own company, the freedom to pursue what genuinely interests you rather than what you think will impress others. You begin to notice things you missed while you were focused on being what others needed. The way morning light falls across your wall, the sound of rain on your windows, the feeling of clean sheets against your skin, the pleasure of a hot bath at the end of a difficult day. These simple experiences become precious when you're present enough to receive them fully. There's a particular quality of silence that emerges in the middle of the night when the world has finally quieted enough for you to hear your own thoughts without interference. In this silence, memories surface that daylight keeps buried. Not just memories of events, but memories of who you were before you learned to be ashamed of your depth. You remember being young and feeling things so intensely that adults seemed alarmed by your emotional range, the way you could be ecstatic about small pleasures, a butterfly landing on your hand, the perfect color of an autumn leaf, the taste of ice cream on a summer day, the way you would weep over stories, over injured animals, over the general unfairness of the world, the way you love people with your whole heart, assuming they would love you back the same way. Adults called you dramatic, too much, too sensitive. They told you to calm down, to not take things so seriously, to toughen up. They meant well, perhaps, trying to prepare you for a world that doesn't always handle sensitive souls gently. But in the process, they taught you that your natural way of being was wrong, that your intense capacity for feeling was a liability rather than a gift. So you learn to perform normalcy. You learn to laugh when you wanted to cry, to stay quiet when you wanted to speak your truth, to pretend indifference when you cared deeply. You became skilled at reading social cues and adjusting your emotional expression accordingly. You developed an internal editor that constantly monitored your responses, making sure they fell within acceptable parameters. The cost of this constant self-monitoring has been enormous. You've spent so much energy managing others' reactions to your emotional truth that you've lost touch with what that truth actually is. You've become so good at being what others need that you've forgotten what you need. You've become so focused on being lovable that you've forgotten what it feels like to be loved for who you actually are. But tonight, in this sanctuary of solitude, you can finally stop performing. You can let your face relax into its natural expression. You can feel what you're actually feeling without immediately trying to fix it, change it, or explain it away. You can simply be with yourself in whatever state you find yourself, offering the same compassion you would extend to a dear friend in distress. What emerges in this space of self-acceptance is surprising. Beneath all the anxiety about being too much, you discover that you're actually quite peaceful when you're not trying to be someone else. Beneath all the fear of being rejected, you find a strength that doesn't depend on others' approval. Beneath all the loneliness, you uncover a capacity for solitude that feels nourishing rather than empty. This doesn't mean you no longer want companionship or love. It means you want these things from a place of wholeness rather than neediness. You want to share your life with someone, not lose yourself in someone. You want to be chosen for who you are, not accepted for who you pretend to be. You want love that celebrates your depth rather than asking you to hide it. The difference in these desires changes everything about how you approach relationships. Instead of trying to make yourself attractive to as many people as possible, you become interested in attracting the right people. Instead of casting a wide net and hoping someone will choose you, you become selective about who choose. Instead of being grateful for any attention, you become discerning about the quality of attention you receive. This selectivity isn't about being judgmental or superior. It's about recognizing that your time and energy are precious resources that deserve to be invested wisely. It's about understanding that not everyone has the capacity to appreciate what you have to offer, and that's not a reflection of your worth. It's simply a fact about compatibility. Some people are meant to be in your life for a season, others for a reason, a precious few for a lifetime. Learning to distinguish between these categories saves you from the heartbreak of expecting seasoned people to stay forever, or trying to force reasoned people into lifetime roles they're not equipped to fill. The people meant to be in your life for a lifetime will recognize your value without you having to prove it. They will appreciate your sensitivity as a strength, not a weakness. They will want to know your thoughts and feelings, not just your agreeable responses. They will see your complexity as fascinating rather than difficult. These people exist, but you may not find them while you're busy trying to be someone you're not. You may not attract them while you're settled for relationships that require you to dim your light. You may not recognize them while you're focused on winning over people who will never truly see you. The ancient Greeks had a word, metanoia, meaning a fundamental transformation of mind and heart. It's often translated as repentance, but its deeper meaning is more like awakening. It's the moment when you suddenly see clearly what was always there, but somehow invisible before. It's the shift from one way of understanding your life to another, more truthful way. You are in the midst of your own metanoia. The old stories about who you are and what you deserve are crumbling, making way for a new understanding that's both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it means acknowledging how much of your life has been lived according to other people's scripts. Liberating because it means you can finally write your own. This new story doesn't require you to become someone different. It requires you to become more yourself than you've ever dared to be. It asks you to trust that who you naturally are is not only enough but necessary. It invites you to consider that your way of loving, feeling, and being in the world is not a problem to be solved, but a gift to be cherished. The shame you've carried about your emotional intensity begins to dissolve as you understand that this intensity is actually a form of spiritual sensitivity. You feel deeply because you're attuned to layers of reality that others might miss. You love fully because your heart is wide enough to hold complexity and contradiction. You hurt profoundly because you're brave enough to care about things that matter. This doesn't make you better than others, but it does make you different. And different has never been easy in a world that rewards conformity. But different is also precious in a world starving for authenticity. Different is what the world needs from people like you. The ones willing to feel deeply, love broadly, hope persistently, despite evidence that hope is often disappointed. You begin to see your life not as a series of failures to fit in, but as a courageous refusal to give up on your vision of what love could be. Every time you've been hurt for loving too much, you could have chosen to love less. Every time you've been rejected for being too intense, you could have chosen to feel less. Every time you've been criticized for caring too deeply, you could have chosen to care less. But you didn't. Against all evidence that the world prefers people who keep their hearts carefully guarded, you kept yours open. Against all advice to be more practical in your expectations of love, you kept believing in its highest possibilities. Against all pressure to accept less than you truly wanted, you kept holding space for more. This persistence in the face of repeated disappointment is not naivety, it's wisdom. It's your soul's way of refusing to let a broken world break your capacity for wholeness. It's your spirit's insistence that love, real love, is possible, even if you haven't experienced it yet in the way you long for. The loneliness you felt has been the loneliness of waiting for a world to catch up to your understanding of how people could treat each other. The sadness you've carried has been grief for a quality of connection that seems rare in a culture focused on surface interactions. The frustration you've experienced has been the natural result of trying to find deep water in shallow pools. But here's what's becoming clear in this moment of recognition. You don't need the whole world to understand you. You don't need everyone to appreciate your way of loving. You need only a few souls who recognize your value, who celebrate your complexity, who meet your depth with their own. These people exist, but you'll only find them when you stop hiding who you truly are. The mask you've worn to protect yourself has also prevented the right people from finding you. The performance you've perfected to gain acceptance has attracted people who love performances, not people who love authentic connection. The walls you've built to avoid rejection have also kept out those who would have chosen you gladly for exactly who you are. Now comes the work of taking down those walls, removing that mask, ending that performance. Not all at once. That would be too overwhelming. But gradually, gently, with the same patience you would show a frightened animal learning to trust. You are that frightened animal, and you are also the one offering trust. In the mythology of many cultures, there comes a moment in the hero's journey when all external help falls away, and the protagonist must face the ultimate challenge alone, not because they are meant to remain alone forever, but because some truths can only be discovered in solitude. Some strengths can only be found when you cannot rely on anyone else's strength. You are in that moment now. Everything you've used to define yourself, your relationships, your roles, your achievements, your ability to be useful to others, has been stripped away or revealed as insufficient. You stand naked before the mirror of your own consciousness, perhaps for the first time in your adult life, seeing yourself without the costumes you've worn to make others comfortable. What you see may surprise you. Beneath all the ways you've learned to minimize yourself, there's a presence that's quite substantial. Beneath all the apologies for taking up space, there's a being who has every right to exist fully. Beneath all the doubt about your worth, there's a soul that has always been precious, long before you did anything to earn or prove that preciousness. This recognition doesn't come as a thought, but as a feeling, a settling into yourself that you may not have experienced since childhood, a sense of coming home to a self you'd forgotten existed, a relief at finally being able to drop the exhausting work of being someone else. The critic in your mind may resist this homecoming. It has worked so hard to keep you safe by pointing out everything wrong with you before others could. It may feel alarmed by this new self-acceptance, warning that if you stop being so hard on yourself, you'll become complacent, lazy, unlovable. This critic means well, but its information is outdated. It developed when you were young and vulnerable, when rejection felt like a threat to your very survival. You can acknowledge this critic's concern while gently correcting its misconceptions. Self-love doesn't make you complacent. It gives you the security to take healthy risks. Self-acceptance doesn't make you lazy. It frees up the energy you've been wasting on self-attack to use for creative purposes. Self-compassion doesn't make you unlovable. It makes you capable of receiving love when it's offered genuinely. As you practice treating yourself with kindness, something remarkable happens. The people in your life begin to respond differently to you. Those who were comfortable with your self-deprecation may feel unsettled by your new self-respect. Those who relied on your willingness to accept less may be confused by your clearer boundaries. But others, perhaps people you hadn't noticed before, are drawn to this new energy of self-possession. The changed relationship with yourself changes all your other relationships. You stop seeking validation from people who are incapable of giving it. You stop trying to earn love from those who don't have it to give. You stop accepting behavior that you would never tolerate if directed towards someone you cared about. This isn't about becoming cold or closed-hearted. It's about becoming wise. It's about recognizing that your love is a treasure to be shared with those who can appreciate its value, not scattered indiscriminately to anyone who happens to cross your path. It's about understanding that saying no to what doesn't serve you creates space for what does. The loneliness you feel during this transition is different from the loneliness you felt before. Before, you were lonely even when surrounded by people because none of them really knew you. Now, you may be physically alone more often, but you're not lonely in the same desperate way. You have yourself for company, and you're discovering that you're actually quite interesting. You start to remember things you enjoyed before you became so focused on what others enjoyed. Books that moved you, music that stirred your soul, activities that brought you pleasure, not because they impressed anyone, but because they fed something essential in you. You begin to rebuild a life around what actually matters to you, rather than what you think should matter. This process of rediscovering your authentic preferences is like archaeological work. You're excavating layers of conditioning to find the original self underneath. Sometimes what you uncover surprises you. Dreams you'd forgotten, talents you dismissed, aspects of your personality that had gone underground because they weren't rewarded in your family or culture. The woman you're becoming is both completely new and exactly who you've always been. New because you're finally free to express aspects of yourself that have been hidden. Exactly who you've always been, because these aspects were there all along, waiting for permission to emerge. There's a particular kind of wisdom that can only be earned through suffering consciously chosen rather than unconsciously endured. For years, you suffered without understanding why, taking on others' pain, accepting relationships that diminished you, carrying guilt that didn't belong to you. This unconscious suffering wore you down without teaching you anything except that life was hard and love was scarce. But now you're beginning to suffer consciously, feeling the grief of recognizing how much of your life you've given away, experiencing the fear of standing alone, enduring the discomfort of disappointing people who prefer your false self to your real one. This conscious suffering is different. It has meaning. It's leading somewhere. One name for this conscious suffering is individuation, a concept that speaks to the process of becoming who you truly are rather than who you've been conditioned to be. It's the psychological and spiritual work of separating your authentic self from the collective expectations that have shaped you. It requires you to disappoint the crowd in order to satisfy your soul. This process is never comfortable. The crowd, whether it's your family, your culture, or your peer group, has invested in you being a certain way. When you change, they may feel betrayed. They may try to pull you back into familiar patterns through guilt, criticism, or withdrawal of affection. They may tell you that you were better before, more pleasant, easier to be around. This is the test of your commitment to yourself. Can you stay true to your emerging authenticity even when it costs you relationships? Can you honor your own needs even when others call you selfish? Can you trust your inner guidance even when it leads you away from what looks safe and familiar? The answers to these questions determine whether you remain trapped in patterns inherited from others or break free to create a life that reflects your own values and desires. This breaking free is not a one-time event, but an ongoing practice. Each day presents new opportunities to choose yourself or abandon yourself, to honor your truth or betray it for temporary comfort. What makes this choice so difficult is that choosing yourself often means choosing uncertainty. When you stop being who others expect you to be, you don't immediately know who you will become. When you leave relationships that don't fit, you don't know when or if better ones will appear. When you quit jobs that drain your soul, you don't know what work will fulfill you. You leap into the unknown with only faith that authenticity leads to a better destination than pretense. This faith is not blind optimism. It's based on a growing understanding that the pain of living an inauthentic life eventually becomes greater than the pain of living an uncertain but honest one. It's recognition that the security you thought you had in people-pleasing was actually quite fragile, dependent on your ability to maintain a performance that was exhausting you. The security you're building now is different. It's based on your relationship with yourself, rather than others' opinions of you. It's rooted in your ability to meet your own needs, rather than hoping others will meet them. It's grounded in your capacity to find meaning in your own experiences rather than seeking validation from external sources. This doesn't mean you become isolated or completely self-sufficient. Humans are social beings. We need connection and community. But you're learning to distinguish between connections that nourish your soul and those that drain it. You're becoming selective about the communities you join, choosing those that celebrate authenticity over those that reward conformity. The people who belong in your new life may not look like the people in your old life. They may come from different backgrounds, hold different values, express love in different ways. What they share is a commitment to truth over comfort, growth over stagnation, authenticity over performance. They may be fewer in number, but their presence in your life will feel more substantial. Some of these soul connections may be surprising. People you dismissed as too different, too intense, too unconventional may turn out to be exactly the mirrors. You need to see yourself clearly. People you admired from a distance, but never approached, may welcome you when you finally have the courage to show up as yourself rather than as who you think they want you to be. The loneliness that once felt like evidence of your unlovability begins to feel like a clearing process. It's not that you're fundamentally alone. It's that you're making space for better connections by refusing to settle for lesser ones. It's not that no one could love you. It's that you're finally ready to be loved for who you actually are rather than who you pretend to be. The dreams that visit you now are different from the anxious dreams of your past, where once your sleep was filled with scenarios of rejection, abandonment, and failure. Now you dream of flying, of discovering hidden rooms in houses you thought you knew completely, of conversations with wise figures who speak in symbols and metaphors your waking mind struggles to interpret, but your soul understands perfectly. These dreams are messages from the parts of your psyche that have been waiting patiently for you to listen. They speak of potentials you haven't yet explored, gifts you haven't yet unwrapped, paths you haven't yet walked. They remind you that you contain multitudes, aspects of yourself that remain mysterious even to you, waiting for the right conditions to emerge. One recurring figure in these dreams is a child who looks like you, but braver, more confident, more free. She runs through fields you recognize, but have never actually seen, laughs with a joy you remember, but haven't felt in years, speaks truths you know, but have been afraid to voice. She is your unlived life, making herself known, showing you what becomes possible when fear stops directing your choices. Another frequent visitor is an older woman with your eyes, but weathered by a different kind of experience. Not the exhaustion of self-betrayal, but the beautiful fatigue of a life fully lived. She moves with the grace of someone who has made peace with her choices, who has learned to love herself through all her seasons of growth and change. She represents the woman you could become if you continue on this path of reclaiming yourself. These dream figures don't speak in words, but in feelings, gestures, glances that convey entire philosophies. The child shows you that playfulness is not frivolity, but wisdom, that wonder is not naivety, but openness to magic. The elder shows you that aging is not decline, but deepening, that wrinkles are not signs of failure, but maps of a life courageously lived. Between these two figures, the eternal child and the wise woman, you find yourself. No longer the anxious performer of your recent past, but not yet the serene sage of your possible future. You are in the fertile middle ground of becoming, where anything is possible, because you're finally willing to imagine alternatives to the life you've been living. This willingness to imagine differently is itself a form of prayer. Every time you envision a life where your sensitivity is celebrated rather than criticized, you're praying. Every time you picture relationships where your depth is appreciated rather than feared, you're praying. Every time you allow yourself to dream of work that feeds your soul rather than drains it, you're praying. These prayers are not requests to some external deity to fix your life for you. They are conversations with the creative force within you that has always been capable of generating new possibilities. They are communications with the part of your being that exists beyond the limitations imposed by past experience and current circumstances. The ancient mystics understood that the divine speaks through dreams, through symbols, through the language of the soul, rather than the literal language of the mind. What they called divine guidance, modern psychology might call intuition or the wisdom of the unconscious. Whatever you choose to call it, you're beginning to listen to sources of wisdom that go deeper than rational analysis or social conditioning. This listening requires a different kind of attention than you're used to, not the hypervigilant attention of someone watching for threats, but the receptive attention of someone open to gifts. Not the analyzing attention of someone trying to figure everything out, but the trusting attention of someone willing to be surprised by what emerges. As you practice this deeper listening, you begin to notice synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that seem to confirm you're moving in the right direction. Books that address exactly what you're struggling with appear in your path. Conversations overheard in coffee shops speak directly to your situation. Songs on the radio seem to be written specifically for your current state of heart. These synchronicities are not magic in the supernatural sense, but they are magical in their ability to remind you that you're part of something larger than your individual struggle. They suggest that the universe itself supports your journey toward authenticity, that forces beyond your conscious control are conspiring to help you find your way home to yourself. There's a moment in every profound transformation when you realize you can never go back to who you were before. Not because that earlier version of yourself was wrong or bad, but because you've seen too much, felt too deeply, understood too clearly to return to unconscious patterns. You've crossed a threshold, and there's no turning back. This realization can be both liberating and terrifying. Liberating because It means you're finally free from the exhausting work of trying to fit into spaces too small for your spirit. Terrifying because it means taking responsibility for creating a life that has no template, no roadmap, no guarantee of success in conventional terms. You are becoming an original rather than a copy. You are writing your own story rather than living out someone else's script. You are creating your own definition of success rather than accepting the ones handed down by family, culture, or society. This is both the burden and the privilege of consciousness. The burden is that you can no longer blame others for your unhappiness. You can no longer stay in situations that diminish you and claim you have no choice. You can no longer accept less than you deserve and pretend it's noble sacrifice. You must take ownership of your life in ways that may feel overwhelming. The privilege is that you get to decide what your life means. You get to choose which values guide your decisions. You get to determine what brings you joy, what work feels meaningful, what kinds of relationships nourish your soul. You get to write the definition of a life well lived rather than accepting definitions that never quite fit your nature. This privilege comes with the responsibility to listen deeply to your own wisdom rather than defaulting to external authorities. You must learn to trust your own judgment about what's right for you, even when that judgment differs from conventional wisdom. You must develop the courage to make choices that reflect your authentic values rather than choices designed to win approval. Some of the choices you make from this new place of self-awareness may seem strange to others. You may leave relationships that look good on paper but feel empty in reality. You may pursue work that pays less but feeds your soul more. You may say no to social obligations that drain your energy, and yes to solitary activities that restore it. These choices may be judged by those who haven't done their own work of self-discovery. They may call you selfish for prioritizing your own well-being. They may call you unrealistic for following your dreams. They may call you difficult for having boundaries. Let them. Their opinions reflect their own limitations, not yours. The woman you're becoming has learned that self-care is not selfishness, but stewardship. You cannot give what you don't have. You cannot love others authentically while betraying yourself. You cannot create beauty in the world while living an ugly relationship with your own heart. Taking care of yourself is taking care of the part of the divine that lives within you. This understanding transforms how you move through the world. You walk differently when you know your worth. You speak differently when you trust your voice. You love differently when you're not desperately seeking love in return. You work differently when you're aligned with your purpose, rather than just trying to pay bills or impress others. The changes in you ripple outward in ways you may not even notice. People respond differently to your new energy. Some are drawn to your authenticity, like flowers to sunlight. Others are made uncomfortable by your refusal to pretend everything is fine when it isn't. Both responses give you valuable information about who belongs in your life and who doesn't. You're learning to trust these responses as guidance rather than taking them personally. When someone is threatened by your growth, it usually says more about their own stuckness than about anything wrong with your evolution. When someone celebrates your transformation, it often indicates their own readiness for change. You become a mirror for others' relationship with authenticity. This mirroring is one of the gifts you offer the world. Simply by being yourself in a culture that often rewards pretense, your commitment to truth becomes radical. In a society that fears depth, your willingness to feel fully becomes revolutionary. In a world that avoids difficult conversations, your honesty becomes healing. You may not have intended to become a teacher or healer, but authenticity itself teaches and heals. People who have forgotten their own depth remember it in your presence. People who have lost touch with their dreams find permission to dream again through your example. People who have given up on real love see it's possible by witnessing your refusal to settle for less. The ancient wisdom traditions speak of a dark night of the soul, a period of spiritual crisis that precedes profound awakening. It's characterized by the collapse of old meanings, the dissolution of familiar identities, the feeling of being lost in a landscape that no longer made sense. You have been through your own version of this dark night, though you may not have recognized it as a sacred passage at the time. What felt like depression may have been incubation. What felt like failure may have been liberation. What felt like endings may have been compost for new beginnings. The breakdown of your old life was necessary for the breakthrough into your authentic one. You had to lose who you thought you were to find who you actually are. This process follows a pattern that mystics have mapped across centuries and cultures. First comes the comfortable, but ultimately unsustainable life built on false premises. Then comes the crisis that shatters these premises. Betrayal, loss, illness, failure, or simply the accumulation of too many compromises of the soul. Then comes the descent into confusion, grief, despair. But the darkness is not the end of the story, it's the middle. After the descent comes the slow journey back to the light, but it's a different light than the one you knew before. It's not the harsh fluorescent light of performance and pretense, but the warm, golden light of authenticity and self-acceptance. It illuminates a landscape you couldn't see before because you were too busy looking where others told you to look. In this new landscape, you discover treasures that were always there, but invisible from your old vantage point. Your sensitivity, which you saw as weakness, reveals itself as strength. Your intensity, which you saw as too much, reveals itself as exactly right for the life you're meant to live. Your high standards for love, which you saw as unrealistic, reveal themselves as a compass, pointing toward relationships worthy of your heart. The gifts you were asked to hide become the very qualities that attract the right people into your life. The parts of yourself you were taught to be ashamed of become the parts others most appreciate about you. The dreams you were told to abandon become the driving force of your most meaningful work. It's as if you spent years looking at yourself through a funhouse mirror that distorted your reflection beyond recognition. Now you're seeing yourself in clear glass for the first time, and you're surprised by what you find. You're not the broken, difficult, too much person you believed yourself to be. You're a complex, beautiful, sensitive soul who has been trying to fit into spaces designed for much smaller spirits. This recognition changes everything. You stop apologizing for taking up space and start claiming the space you need. You stop minimizing your accomplishments and start celebrating them. You stop hiding your light and start letting it shine at its natural brightness. You stop asking permission to exist fully and start granting yourself that permission. The people who love this fuller version of you were worth the wait. They see your complexity as fascinating rather than difficult. They experience your depth as refreshing rather than overwhelming. They appreciate your authenticity as rare and precious rather than needy or attention-seeking. With them, you finally understand what it feels like to be loved for who you are rather than despite who you are. These relationships teach you that healthy love enhances rather than diminishes. It celebrates your growth rather than fearing it. It encourages your dreams rather than dismissing them. It meets your depth with its own rather than asking you to stay shallow. It sees your sensitivity as a gift rather than a burden. In the presence of this quality of love, whether romantic, platonic, or familial, you bloom in ways you never have before. You discover aspects of yourself that only emerge in the safety of genuine acceptance. You find depths of creativity, wisdom, and joy that were locked away while you were focused on being who others needed you to be. But perhaps most importantly, you learn to offer this quality of love to yourself. You become your own safe haven, your own source of encouragement, your own most trusted friend. You develop the capacity to comfort yourself through difficult times, to celebrate yourself through victories, to forgive yourself through mistakes. This self-love is not narcissism or self-indulgence. It's the foundation upon which all healthy relationships are built. It's the source from which you can give authentically rather than from emptiness. It's the home base to which you can return when the world becomes too harsh or demanding. The night air carries the scent of possibilities you haven't yet imagined. Somewhere beyond your current reality, a life is waiting that reflects your truest values, your deepest loves, your most authentic self. You can't see it clearly, yet it exists more as feeling than form, more as knowing than knowledge. But it's there, calling to you through every moment of dissatisfaction with less than you deserve. This life you're being called toward doesn't require you to become perfect. Requires you to become real. It doesn't demand that you have all the answers. It asks only that you be willing to live the questions with courage and curiosity. It doesn't promise freedom from pain. It offers the deeper satisfaction of pain that has meaning because it serves your growth rather than your diminishment. In this emerging life, your work feeds your soul as well as your bank account. The people in your inner circle see and celebrate your true nature. Your living space reflects your authentic aesthetic rather than what you think others expect. Your daily routines honor your natural rhythms rather than forcing you into patterns that drain you. Your choices align with your values rather than others' expectations. This isn't fantasy. This is the natural result of living from authenticity rather than from fear. When you stop spending energy on maintaining false versions of yourself, that energy becomes available for creating what actually matters to you. When you stop accepting relationships that require self-betrayal, you make space for connections that nourish your soul. When you stop working just for security, you can pursue work that has meaning. The transition between your current life and this authentic one doesn't happen overnight. It happens through a series of small, brave choices. Each time you speak your truth instead of what you think others want to hear. Each time you honor your needs instead of ignoring them. Each time you say no to what depletes you, and yes, to what restores you. Each choice builds momentum toward the life that's waiting for you. Some of these choices will feel scary. Scary because they require you to trust that being yourself is enough, even when you have no evidence that this is true. Scary because they ask you to risk rejection by people whose acceptance you've worked hard to earn. Scary because they mean releasing the illusion of control that comes from trying to manage everyone's opinion of you. But the fear that comes from moving toward authenticity is different from the fear that comes from moving away from it. The fear of being yourself is clean fear. It clarifies rather than confuses, energizes rather than depletes, leads somewhere rather than circles endlessly. The fear of being authentic is like the fear of diving into clear water, intense but not toxic. The fear of being inauthentic, by contrast, is mode fear. It creates anxiety without purpose, worry without end, exhaustion without accomplishment. It's the fear of being found out, of not being good enough, of losing love you never really had because it was contingent on your performance rather than your essence. As you practice choosing authentic fear over inauthentic fear, you develop what might be called spiritual courage. This is different from the courage that comes from not being afraid. This is the courage that comes from being afraid and choosing love anyway. Love for yourself, love for truth, love for the possibility of a life that reflects your deepest values. This spiritual courage becomes the foundation of everything that follows. It allows you to speak up in situations where your voice is needed. It enables you to walk away from situations that compromise your integrity. It gives you the strength to keep your heart open even after it's been wounded. It provides the faith to believe in possibilities you can't yet see. With this courage as your companion, you begin to move through the world differently. You walk more slowly because you're no longer running from yourself. You listen more deeply because you're no longer afraid of what you might hear. You love more freely because you're no longer trying to earn it through self-sacrifice. The woman you're becoming is both more vulnerable and more powerful than the woman you used to be. More vulnerable because she no longer hides behind masks and roles. More powerful because she no longer wastes energy maintaining pretenses. She's learned that true strength comes not from never falling down, but from falling down authentically, feeling the impact fully, learning from it completely, and rising with wisdom rather than just determination. This woman knows that healing is not a destination, but a way of traveling. She understands that wholeness doesn't mean having no broken places, but finding beauty in the cracks. Where light gets in, she recognizes that the goal is not to eliminate sensitivity, but to honor it as the gift it has always been. In the deepest psychology of transformation, there comes a moment when the old self must die for the new self to be born. This death is not literal but metaphorical, the death of identities that no longer serve, beliefs that no longer fit, patterns that no longer support your growth. It can feel like losing everything you thought you were, which is terrifying until you realize that what you thought you were was mostly what others needed you to be. The Swiss psychiatrist who spent his life mapping these territories of the psyche understood this process intimately. Carl Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The unconscious patterns that have been directing your life, the need to please, the fear of abandonment, the belief that love must be earned. These patterns felt like fate because you weren't aware they were choices. But now you're making the unconscious conscious. You're seeing the invisible threads that have been pulling your behavior in directions that didn't truly serve you. You're recognizing the stories you've been telling yourself about what's possible, what you deserve, what love looks like. And in seeing these patterns clearly, you gain the power to choose differently. Jung also wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are." This privilege is what you're claiming now, not the shallow version of being yourself that means indulging every whim or mood, but the deep version that means aligning your choices with your authentic values, expressing your truth even when it's inconvenient, honoring your nature even when it's misunderstood. This alignment creates what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are rather than who you've been conditioned to be. It's the psychological equivalent of a plant growing towards sunlight, naturally moving in the direction of what gives it life. For years, you may have been growing in directions determined by others' expectations, creating a distorted shape that looked successful from the outside, but felt wrong from the inside. Now, you're growing in your natural direction again, toward authentic connection rather than convenient relationships, toward meaningful work rather than just profitable work, toward self-expression rather than self-suppression, toward joy rather than just comfort, toward love rather than just security. This natural growth pattern feels right in your body in a way that forced growth never did. When you make choices aligned with your authentic self, your nervous system relaxes. When you speak your truth, your breathing deepens. When you honor your needs, your energy increases rather than depletes. Your body knows the difference between authentic and inauthentic action, even when your mind gets confused. The people who love your authentic self create this same sense of rightness in your body. Being with them feels like coming home. Their presence relaxes rather than activates your defensive systems. Their love feels nourishing rather than depleting. With them, you can be vulnerable without feeling unsafe, honest without fearing judgment, complex without feeling like too much. These relationships teach you that healthy love is not hard work in the way you were taught. Yes, relationships require effort and commitment and the willingness to grow. But they shouldn't require you to betray yourself, to walk on eggshells, to constantly prove your worth. They shouldn't leave you feeling drained more often than you feel filled. Love that requires you to be less than who you are is not love, it's control, wearing the mask of affection. Love that asks you to dim your light so others feel brighter is not love. It's insecurity disguised as care. Love that makes you doubt your own perceptions is not love. It's manipulation dressed up as concern. Real love sees you clearly and chooses you anyway. Real love celebrates your growth rather than feeling threatened by it. Real love wants to know your thoughts and feelings, not just your agreeable responses. Real love creates space for your complexity, rather than asking you to be simple and easy. As you experience this quality of love, first with yourself, then with others who are capable of offering it, you understand why all those other relationships felt so exhausting. You weren't failing at love. You were trying to find real water in mirages. You weren't too difficult. You were too real for people who preferred performances. You weren't asking for too much. You were asking for the right things from people who couldn't provide them. This understanding liberates you from the burden of believing that your loneliness was evidence of your unlovability. Your loneliness was evidence of your wisdom, your soul's refusal to accept substitutes for what it really needed, your heart's insistence on holding space for genuine connection rather than settling for shallow interactions. The night is deep now, and in this depth you find a quality of peace that has nothing to do with your circumstances and everything to do with your relationship with yourself. This peace doesn't depend on having all your problems solved or all your dreams fulfilled. It comes from the simple but profound recognition that you are worthy of love exactly as you are, not as you might become with enough effort and improvement. This worthiness is not something you achieve, it's something you remember. It was true when you were born, before you did anything to earn or prove it. It remained true through all the years when you forgot it, when others convinced you it was conditional, when you believed you had to purchase it through perfection or service or self-sacrifice. Your worthiness is like the sun, sometimes obscured by clouds of doubt or criticism, but never actually diminished. The clouds pass, and the sun remains constant and warm and life-giving. The criticism passes, the doubt passes, the fear passes, but your essential worth remains patient and eternal and unshakable. From this place of remembered worthiness, everything looks different. The rejections you experienced don't look like evidence of your inadequacy. They look like redirections toward better matches. The disappointments don't look like proof that you ask for too much. They look like information about what you don't want to settle for. The periods of loneliness don't look like punishment. They look like preparation for relationships worthy of your depth. You begin to see your life not as a series of failures to be normal, but as a hero's journey toward authenticity. Every challenge has taught you something essential about your own strength. Every loss has revealed something you didn't know you could survive. Every betrayal has clarified your values. Every disappointment has refined your understanding of what you actually want. The sensitivity you were taught to see as weakness becomes visible as your superpower. It allows you to notice subtleties others miss, to feel into situations more deeply, to respond with nuance and complexity. It makes you a gifted friend, a perceptive partner, a compassionate presence in a world that often lacks these qualities. The intensity you were asked to tone down becomes recognizable as your gift to the world. It allows you to love more fully, create more passionately, experience more vividly. It makes life richer, relationships deeper, experiences more meaningful. It's what allows you to touch others' hearts, to inspire their own depths, to remind them what it means to be fully alive. The standards you were told were too high become visible as your compass toward excellence. They guide you toward relationships that honor your worth, work that matches your values, experiences that feed your soul. They prevent you from settling for less than you deserve, even when settling would be easier. These qualities that made you feel different, difficult, too much, they are exactly what the world needs more of. In a culture obsessed with surface appearances, your depth is healing. In a society afraid of real emotion, your willingness to feel is revolutionary. In a world that rewards conformity, your authenticity is radical. You don't need to tone yourself down to fit into spaces too small for your spirit. You need to expand the spaces you inhabit. You don't need to love less intensely to avoid scaring people away. You need to find people brave enough to match your intensity. You don't need to want less to avoid disappointment. You need to become skilled at recognizing what's actually available rather than trying to create availability where it doesn't exist. The shift from trying to fit in to creating belonging changes everything. Instead of exhausting yourself, trying to become acceptable to everyone, you focus on becoming irresistible to the right someones. Instead of dimming your light to avoid casting shadows, you shine brightly and trust that those who belong in your life will be attracted rather than threatened. The loneliness that once felt eternal begins to feel temporary. Not because you found your person or your people, though that may come, but because you found yourself. And once you've truly found yourself, you're never really alone again. You carry within you the most important relationship of your life, the one between who you are and who you're becoming. This relationship with yourself becomes the template for all other relationships. You learn to treat yourself with the kindness you wish to receive from others. You learn to offer yourself the understanding you hope for from friends. You learn to give yourself the encouragement you seek from partners. You become your own safe harbor, your own source of comfort, your own most trusted advisor. As the night deepens toward dawn, you find yourself in that liminal space between who you were and who you're becoming. The old self hasn't completely died, and the new self hasn't completely emerged. You exist in the fertile darkness of transition, where profound change gestates before it becomes visible to the outer world. This in-between space is sacred. It's where transformation happens, not in the dramatic moments of decision, but in the quiet moments of integration. It's where new neural pathways form to support new ways of being. It's where your soul reorganizes itself around a different understanding of what's possible. You may feel unsteady in this space, uncertain about which version of yourself to trust. The old version whispers familiar warnings about the dangers of authenticity, the risks of standing out, the necessity of people-pleasing for survival. The new version whispers different truths about the safety of self-expression, the beauty of being seen, the necessity of boundaries for thriving. Both voices contain wisdom. The old voice protected you when you were young and vulnerable, when conformity was indeed safer than authenticity. The new voice is guiding you now that you're strong enough to handle the consequences of being real, mature enough to choose quality over quantity in relationships, wise enough to recognize that true security comes from self-knowledge rather than others' approval. You don't need to silence the old voice entirely. You need to thank it for its service and gently correct its outdated information. The world you're living in now is different from the world that taught you to hide. You are different, stronger, wiser, more capable of taking care of yourself when others can't accept your full truth. The process of integrating these different aspects of yourself is not linear. Some days you feel confident in your new way of being. Other days you want to crawl back into familiar patterns of self-sacrifice and people-pleasing. This is normal. Change happens in spirals, not straight lines. You circle back to familiar territory, but each time you see it from a higher perspective. What matters is not that you never doubt yourself, but that you keep choosing authenticity even when it feels scary. What matters is not that you never feel lonely, but that you refuse to cure loneliness by betraying yourself. What matters is not that you immediately attract perfect relationships, but that you become someone capable of recognizing and receiving authentic love when it appears. This capacity for authentic love, both giving and receiving, is perhaps the greatest gift of your transformation. You're learning to love without losing yourself, to be intimate without becoming enmeshed, to care deeply without taking responsibility for others' emotions. You're discovering that healthy love enhances rather than diminishes, liberates rather than confines, celebrates rather than controls. These discoveries change not only how you relate to others, but how you relate to life itself. You begin to approach your days with curiosity rather than anxiety, with openness rather than defensiveness, with trust rather than fear. You start to see challenges as opportunities for growth,